Welcome to Monday's edition of Renew Plus. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us again today and for another week number 9 of our rest area we've entitled Just As If Sin Never Existed. And I tell you, that is an awesome reality that we've uncovered the last few weeks. And this rest area is off the main course, the Highway 316 course we've been on all year, talking about the unconditional love of God, the abundant overflowing grace of God, what it did for us in Christ that we could not do for ourselves. And then we talked about grace and faith, how those are always coupled together. Those always work together. What God has provided for us and done for us through His finished work in Christ Jesus, through His grace, has to be received and appropriated with our faith. And that's why that element is so important. That's why those two run together, is God's grace and our faith. God's grace in giving and our faith in receiving. But over the last number of weeks, we have been talking about this theme of just as if sin never existed. We call it a rest area because that is exactly what it is. It is the rest of God. Why do we call it a rest area or the rest of God? Because this is a finished, completed work. You know, sin is really not the issue anymore. I know people looking in the natural realm, they would still draw the conclusion that sin is a problem. Sin is really not the issue and the problem anymore. It has more to do with what we believe than that sin issue. And, you know, how we deal with that sin issue. Are we going to trust in God? Are we going to look and focus our trust and our faith over on God, our dependence over on God? Or are we going to kind of mix it in with some of God and some of us as believers? Now, those who aren't believers, they're trusting in themselves. They're just hoping somehow that their good works are going to outweigh their bad works. And I can tell you that is never going to be the case. But we can have an assurance that we are born again, that we're saved, we're on our way to heaven, and that also we can live the blessed life here on the earth. Now, how is that? Well, we have to totally trust in God. We have to trust in God for our salvation. We have to trust and rely and depend on God completely for our provision, for the blessing of God working in our life, for victory in life. And so that's where this is where the drawing line is right here, is how much we're trusting in God versus how much we're trusting in ourselves or trusting in men. And that theme is going to be, again, the bottom line over the next couple of weeks as we finish this particular series up here on the rest area. I want to revisit some scriptures we looked at earlier in this rest area series here. I want to go back over to the Gospel of Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. This is fall, by the way, and I'm getting pummeled with leaves and acorns right now. So if I get hit, don't worry about it. We'll just keep going. No problem. I'd rather be outside. I'm an outside guy, so we'll just work with it. But let's go over to Mark chapter 9 again. This is a story we looked at earlier in this series about the man who brought his son to Jesus' disciples while Jesus and Peter, James, and John were on the Mount of Transfiguration, if you remember. And Jesus was up there, and while that was going on the mountaintop, there's a situation brewing at the bottom of the mountain. And this man had brought his son to Jesus' disciples to have him delivered, because this was a spirit that was trying to destroy this young man's life. He was trying to oppress and destroy his life, throw him into the water and to the fire to destroy him. And so you can see the desperation in this father's life. I mean, he wanted his son delivered. He would try anything, and he had heard about Jesus. He had heard about the things that Jesus and his disciples had done in deliverance and healing and all these other good things. But you know, then it comes down to, while Jesus wasn't there, these disciples tried to cast the spirit out but could not. And so there was kind of a skirmish down there. Jesus came down with his other 3 disciples right in the middle of this, and he saw some scribes and Pharisees, religious people and others, discussing something with his other disciples, and obviously it did not look good. They were probably debating, arguing, finger pointing, all this kind of thing. And so at that point, Jesus walks up to him and said, you know, what are you discussing with them? You know, he's concerned about his disciples' well-being here and leaving them, you know, hanging out there. So he said, what are you discussing with them? And about that time, this father of this child spoke up and said, I brought my son who had a mute spirit. We can call it all kind of different names of spirit, but it was a demonic force, a demonic spirit. You know, it came from hell. It came from the forces of darkness to torment and try to destroy this boy's life and really tear up this household. So this father said, I brought to you my son to cast this spirit out, but your disciples could not do it. And note, this is something this father said at this point. And we can see this lifelong experience and lifelong disappointments at various methods of treatment to try to relieve his son and deliver his son from this bad spirit, this bad situation. And so he says this to Jesus. He says, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Now at this point, he's not really sure that Jesus can do anything because his disciples could not do anything about this situation. So he said, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and please help us. You can just see again hear the desperation in this man's voice as he says this to Jesus. And you know, Jesus said something to him. He actually put the ball back in his court. And this is where we want to pick up verse 23. Verse 23, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. I tell you, that is an astounding statement. And there's no way you can actually accept that as a reality right there without looking at it through God's eyes. And see, that's the problem many times. We're looking at things through man's eyes, through our eyes, through traditional eyes. But notice, I want you to see here, Jesus said to him. So Jesus is talking. This is not some kind of hyped up preacher on his third pot of coffee on the day. This is Jesus himself that said these words. These words are in red in my Bible, okay? He said, Jesus said to him, if you can believe. Now we've been talking about the last few weeks here how important it is for us to believe correctly, believe rightly. See, right believing is going to end up to be right results in our life. And this is exactly what Jesus is saying. So notice he said, if you can believe. Believing is the key for new covenant living. Whereas the old covenant of law was all about doing what we can do to earn, what we can do to achieve, what we can do in our own self-effort and self-righteousness. I want you to see Jesus is introducing this new covenant way of life to all of us. And he said, if you can believe. If you can believe. The man said, if you can do anything. Jesus said, if you can believe. See, that's the whole difference in whether things are going to work out to our benefit and favor or not. Are we trying to just do something to help God out? Are we trying to do something to earn God's acceptance, blessing? Are we trusting in ourselves and our own actions and deeds? Or are we just resting and believing? Now, again, faith and believing does require corresponding actions. And it will lead to corresponding actions. We know that. But it does not, our actions do not take the place of our believing. Our believing gives action to our faith. So he said, if you can believe. Now I know this time of year, the time that this is originally airing, we're closing in on Christmas, the Christmas season. And you know, there's a lot of different signs when I go into home decor stores and those kind of things that said believe. Now that means one thing to me. Now I know what they're saying, you know, and they're saying we need to believe in Santa Claus or, you know, whatever else out there. This kind of believing is completely different than what they're thinking. Because this kind of believing is not making it happen. This kind of believing is hooking us up with something that's already been done and has already happened. And we're talking about the finished work of Jesus. Now we've also looked at over the last number of weeks how we're already blessed with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ. We've already looked at those past tense terminologies of the new covenant, and we found out that this is a finished, completed work. God has already done something about the sin problem. In fact, we've already found out that Jesus completely removed sin from our life. But we have to believe that to be so. That we're not believing it in order to make it happen, in order for it to be so. It's already so, and now our believing is just coming in alignment with what God has already done, what He's already finished, what He's already completed, what He's already perfected in all of us, and what He's already made available in this finished work of Jesus. So notice, this is what Jesus is saying. He said, if you can believe. In other words, it's already possible. But if you can believe, notice, all things are possible to him who believes. To him who believes. Now, all things are possible with God, we know that. But are all things possible to us? Well, they become possible when we begin to believe correctly. In other words, in alignment with this finished work, with this new covenant that we have in Christ Jesus. So I want you to see, now everyone has that realm of possibility. I looked up the word possible right here. This word possible, and this is just according to the Webster's Dictionary, simple definition right here. But I just felt, impressed to just look up that word and see really what that meant. We know what it means, but what was the definition of that word possible? The word possible or possibility in the Webster's Dictionary simply is defined as being within the limits of ability, capacity, or realization. Being within the limits of ability, capacity, or realization. Now, everybody has a certain amount or a realm of possibility. In other words, they have a particular realm where they believe that things are indeed possible for them. Now, unfortunately, most people's idea and belief system leads them to believe things are possible as long as we can do something about it, as long as other men or man-made institutions can do something about it. If money can do it, if we can work enough and earn enough, we can do that. That becomes possible. We believe it's possible if maybe the government can do it. Well, that's been a big question mark over recent decades, I can tell you. We've found out that men are very limited in what they can do. But people believe within that realm of possibility. But there comes a fence line, a border, a boundary, or a ceiling where if we cross over that, what we believe to be possible, we cross into the area of the impossible. And see, that's where what Jesus just says right here almost passes over us and becomes a pie in the sky, fantasy, magical type thing where we really don't believe it. But it can still, is what Jesus is saying, if you can believe correctly, believe in the right thing, believe in the who. Let's put it that way. And that's with a capital W-H-O. When he's talking about when we're believing in the right person, believing in the right things, then what happens? Then those fences, those borders, those boundaries and ceilings where we were limited in the past because we were looking at ourselves, we were looking at other people, we were looking at our resources and what it could do, what it could buy, what it could accomplish. That created a fence line, a border, a boundary around us where that kind of kept us in with that realm of possibility. And outside of that fence, outside of that border or boundary, we didn't really believe things were possible. But Jesus said, according to the new covenant, he's breaking down those fences. He's getting rid of the boundaries and the borders. He's getting rid of those short ceilings. He's breaking us out of our usual realm of possibility. He's taken us out where all things are possible. See, this is what Jesus is saying right here. He said, if you can believe, in other words, if you can believe the right thing, if you can believe and trust in the right person, and that is the Most High God, then all things are possible to him that believes. Now, everybody could say, if I believe, some things are possible. But Jesus took that out. He said, if you can believe right, all things are possible. In other words, there are no fences. There are no boundaries. There are no limitations. There are no ceilings to what God can do. And see, this is the powerful thing we're going to get into this week. We're going to talk about removing those fences of limitations in our own minds and hearts. And I will say it's an inside job. It's not something external. It's something internal. And you know, that realm of possibility is a little bit different for everybody. That border, that fence line is a little different for everybody, depending on what they're looking at, what they're focusing their trust and their faith in, what they're believing. And I can tell you, if we believe right according to the new covenant, then those fences of limitations are removed and all things become possible. And again, these are the words of Jesus here. Well, that's all the time I've got for today. Join us again tomorrow as we pick up from here. If you'd like additional materials and resources, go to tonycowan.org. We'll see you tomorrow.